Hey, it's Mazzy here. Thanks for visiting. Another deep dive into my hometown, my birthplace, San Francisco, the music, the art of San Francisco. I love San Francisco psychedelia. There's so much psychedelia in the various directions you can go, but I want to do something a little different for me. But I've been showing some books and some suggested books as well as art books I've shown over the last several years as well, obviously, as the music. This is not about records or it's not about the sound, although these are books written by some of the artists involved, the visual artists as well as the musical artists, as well as some archivists creating these things. So to me, a big part of my vision growing up in San Francisco at a young age, the summer of love, I was 13. I was bar mitzvahed at the very tail, September of 1967 in San Francisco. But I was around it, but I was a young lad with my friends riding our bikes to Golden Gate Park starting in 67. So I would see The Dead in 68 and Jefferson Airplane, Big Brother with Janis Joplin and Quicksilver. A lot of the bands that were playing the free shows in The Haight, Golden Gate Park, Polo Fields, before I started going to the Fillmore, Winterland, and the shows. But there is a companion video, so there is a link below to that companion video where I show my Handbill poster collection. So please check that out. It's just me shuffling through that collection of mine, which I've saved over the last 40, 50 years. So here we go, into a stack of books, a stack of Scribes, and I'm going to start with a series of books on poster arts of the scene. This is Art of the Fillmore, Bill Graham presents. Bill Graham was a champion of using all these artists. He used them for the Fillmore, the original Fillmore Auditorium on Fillmore and Geary. And then when they had to move, they took over the Carousel Ballroom on Market Street, and that became the Fillmore West in the same city. He did do an East Coast version that only lasted a few years of the Fillmore. I never went to that Fillmore. This has shows at Winterland and then a little beyond. Wonderful, wonderful book of all the poster arts. It features the various artists here, and they get a nod, obviously. And a fantastic art book. This is published by Acid Test Productions. Again, I do not know the availability of all these books, but just a showcase, in a way, a bibliography for all you to see. But it goes by artist, and fantastic, fantastic. This is the office that Bill Graham had. Now, if you visit the Fillmore today, it's been revamped. This couple revamped it after it was closed for a number of years on Fillmore and Geary. And then before he died in the last several years, before Bill Graham's death, he took it over again. And upstairs, there's a bar, and it's called the Poster Room. And it has full-size replicas of all these. So if you ever get a chance to go to San Francisco to see a show there, you must go upstairs, have a cocktail, have a drink, have a beer, and look at the Poster Room. It's just fantastic to see the amazing art. And not just the artwork, but the bills that Bill Graham, mixing blues and occasionally jazz and rock and roll and all kinds of soul music mixed in on all these bills, 2 to 3 acts. And sometimes the acts were sort of a convergence of fusing of musical tastes and musical genres. This is a beautiful book. Aberville Big Art published book. I think this is out of print. They do have a smaller volume of this. This is The Art of Rock, a spectacular visual and oral history. This is beyond San Francisco. So you have the San Francisco scene, you have the scene and early rock and roll as well, and a series of great posters, even into the punk scene and beyond. So this is a highly recommended book. A big volume of wonderful art. There's a show I saw, that's the Rolling Stones. They did 4 shows at Winterland in 1972 when Exile came out. Smaller venue, holds 5,000 people. Stevie Wonder opened up. I was at they did a 4 o'clock and an 8 o'clock show. I was at the first night, 8 o'clock show. And it was a thank you to San Francisco in a way, or a mea culpa after the 3 years earlier, the Altamont debacle. And I love that show. That's when Exile came out. So there you go. This is another book that, again, is not specifically San Francisco, and it's called Rock Graphics Original. And again, another volume of poster art, various takes on poster art, label art, American, European, the UK scene, the psychedelic, the use of type that you really couldn't read. There's several essays like Designing the Dead for the Grateful Dead, and just really a wonderful, we have here, again, by artists and by genre as well. So this is a fantastic book. I believe this is still in print, and this is Thames and Hudson, a UK publisher, but wonderful, highly recommended book as well here. Now this is something that is very limited, and I bought this from the publisher at the Haight Street Fair in 1991, and I have it signed, and it's edited by Alan Cohen. And this is the San Francisco Oracle. At the height of the San Francisco scene in the late 1960s, 66, 67, 68, into 69, I believe, there were two underground newspapers, the Oracle based in San Francisco and the Berkeley Barb out of the East Bay. And at the time, the Berkeley Barb was considered the more raunchy. And during the Summer of Love, 66, 67, 68, and beyond, hippies were selling these on the street. You'd walk down Haight Street. I remember going with my mom. She drove us to Tower Records in 68. And even at that point, coming back on Haight Street, it was like bumper to bumper, especially 67, 68. It was still a big tourist site. It became a little sketchy into 68, unfortunately, with the bad drugs. But this book, San Francisco Oracle, collects a lot of the editions of the actual underground newspaper, reprints them in a bound volume, has the articles, has the illustrations, has the photographs, the counterculture, drug scene, music scene, psychedelia. Member of my buddy Larry and I, literally at 67, would go with his parents to Hippie Hill, which was at Golden Gate Park, right adjacent to Stanion Street, that lines the eastern side of Golden Gate Park where Haight Street starts. And we'd walk down Haight Street, go to the psychedelic shop, go to the head shops, go to the music shops, the poster the poster store there, and buy a bunch of these big posters, psychedelic posters. I remember my dad bringing home from his business a black light for me to have, and had these wonderful posters. So this is something I really cherish because it's hard to get. I think you can find it. I have no idea the price. But again, this is a bound collector's editions from 1991. So this is 31 years old now of the San Francisco Oracle. Now this is a program I got in October 1968. My friend Danny brought me to the International Pop Festival, San Francisco International Pop Festival. A lot of people don't know that existed, and it was in Alameda County. We went both days, October 68, Saturday and Sunday. Mad River, Rejoice, Lee Michaels, Iron Butterfly, Johnny Rivers, Fraternity Man, Buddy Miles, Express, Jose Feliciano, The Animals, Womb, MC Squared, Loading Zone, Creedence Clearwater, soon after their first album came out, Canned Heat, Deep Purple, when Hush was on the charts, Procol Harum, the Chambers Brothers, and the Grassroots. What a show. I was 14 years old, my first big festival, just a wonderful event, a wonderful, I just had being a 14-year-old, being able to go to see a show like this was great. So, here's another book that is not specific to San Francisco, but it's about that scene, and it's called You Say One a Revolution, Records and Rebels, 1966 to 1970. Of course, this iconic image of John Lennon right there. You have Twiggy, you have Che Guevara, you have Angela Davis, Jimi Hendrix, Allen Ginsberg, Andy Warhol, Martin Luther King. Not one San Franciscan there. But it talks about the whole counterculture scene historically. This is more of a social commentary. Of course, it brings on the Fabs from 1967 and what was happening in San Francisco. Of course, you go from the Beach Boys to Janis Joplin, that really opposites, really a mix of things. Monterey Pop Festival, 1967, one of the first important music festivals in America, rock and roll festivals. You say you want a revolution. Another overview of the psychedelic scene is I Want to Take You Higher, obviously taken from the Sly Stone song, the psychedelic era, 1965 to 1969. This is published by Chronicle Books out of San Francisco. And of course, it has the whole scene from swinging London to San Francisco to New York, poster art, the scene, the social side of it. Beautifully curated, beautifully edited, a lot of wonderful photographs, well written. There's Quicksilver there, amongst my favorite bands of the scene. I Want to Take You Higher. Chronicle Books out of San Francisco did a number of books over the years. They're the ones that actually put out and published the Beatles anthology in this country. But this is a book that I really like. It was one of the first big visual books that they put out of the San Francisco scene. And this is San Francisco Rock. And this is 1965 to 1985. So this expands beyond the whole 60s and the Summer of Love in the late 60s. It goes to every group from the Flaming Groovies to Graham Central Station in the 70s, to the punk scene, Dirk Dirksen and Jello Biafra. Dirk Dirksen's opened and produced shows at the Mabuhay Gardens. You got Howard Hessman, who was a member of the San Francisco comedy troupe, The Committee. Those of you know him from WKRP in Cincinnati with Huey Lewis, who had his band Clover before moving on. Now, these are people we'd see all the time. You got Chris Nab, who started Aquarius Records, one of the great record stores that still exists in a different incarnation, obviously. Chris Nab, I remember his store because he brought a lot of imports, a lot of British music very early before we even saw it at Tower Records. It was on Castro Street, then it moved to 24th Street in San Francisco. You got Howie Klein, who started 415 Records, the punk scene. They both did their first punk shows on college radio, KUSF and KSAN for a little while. And Howie Klein started 415 Records, later became the president of Sire Records, and really introduced San Francisco to a lot of great punk music and new wave music. Of course, another view of the posters. I have a signed copy of the artist who did the Zigzag poster. That was Alton Kelly, a great artist. They feature a lot of the poster artists in this book as well. Another show I attended, Pink Floyd, the Animals Tour at the Oakland Coliseum. Bill Graham and Janis Joplin with Big Brother and the Holding Company. This is a fantastic book. I believe it's long out of print as well, but I highly recommend this one. The only CD box I want to include, because the bulk of this is a book with great music, and this is a 4 CD set that Rhino put out. It follows along with the original Nuggets concept that Lenny Kaye did originally for Elektra Records, and Sire Records redid it. This is Love is the Song We Sing. This is a fantastic set. 4 CDs, San Francisco Nuggets, 1965 to 1970. You got the We Five, you got the Warlocks, obviously Early Dead, the Bull Brummels, Jefferson Airplane, Family Tree, Mojo Men, Country Joe and the Fish, Sopwith Camels, Syndicate of Sound, Chocolate Watch Band, Quicksilver, Jefferson Airplane, on, Blue Cheer, on and on. But what's great about this, that's a wonderful, almost like the family portrait of all the San Francisco bands at the time, or most of them, taken in Golden Gate Park, actually taken in the, I think it's the Panhandle actually, that jets into Golden Gate Park. And this is a photograph by Jim Marshall, great photographer. This is beautifully curated as well, put together with photographs, little smaller, shorter essays on each band that are included in this compilation. Talks about the track, who produced it. Again, probably the best overview, not all the big hits, but has some deep tracks too, and a wonderful, wonderful set. This is a special set, and I love when they did this. They did a Los Angeles version as well, but you know how us native San Franciscans feel about Los Angelinos. One of the great writers in San Francisco in the 60s was Ralph J. Gleason, who wrote for the San Francisco Chronicle, jazz critic, music critic. He really promoted the San Francisco bands, the psychedelic movement that was going on, and he hosted a television show on the PBS station of great jazz artists. And this is the selected writings of Ralph J. Gleason, Music in the Air. This is put together by his son, Toby Gleason, with a foreword by Jan Wenner. Ralph Gleason also started Rolling Stone magazine with Jan. And this takes a lot of his great articles and reviews from the Chronicle and essays beyond on jazz, on blues, on rock and roll, and psychedelic. And this is a fantastic overview of the time, going through articles he wrote for the newspapers. Everything from Pete Seeger, Farewell to the Duke of Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Like a Rolling Stone, The Flower Children, Bob Dylan, Lenny Bruce, talks about politics and culture, because I know a lot of people sometimes when I pontificate on my political views say, I just want to hear the music, I don't want to hear the politics. This was an important part of the scene in the 1960s, and not just in San Francisco. The political movement and the musical movement were interchangeable. There was a lot of crossovers from the writers, from the musicians, from the producers, and really important. And this is a great sort of look at the music scene of all genres. And what I loved about growing up in San Francisco with Bill Graham, the way he would produce shows, writers like Ralph Gleason, and radio stations like KSAN and KMPX, the first underground stations. Yes, rock and roll was a big emphasis for me, but you'd hear early jazz stuff, you'd hear folk music, you'd hear country a little bit, and you'd hear spiritual and Indian music and world music. We didn't call it world music, we didn't call it foreign language music, but we mixed it in on a night. We'd heard beat poetry, we heard comedy records, we'd heard people like Ken Nordine, who does his word jazz series, mixed in with a Grateful Dead record all night on the radio stations. It was an amazing time to grow up and listening and being introduced to all this culture, the counterculture, the politics. And definitely this was a time during the Vietnam War and civil rights movement. So it's hard for people who weren't there at the time and place to really understand that all this stuff, yes, it was about the music, stupid, but it was about the scene and everything else. You were enveloped by the politics, and you couldn't get away from it, and you didn't want to get away from it. Maybe some people did, but it was obviously is why and where I am today, because of reading people like this, like Ralph Gleason, and early copies of Rolling Stone, Oracle, Berkeley Barb, etc. Radical, maybe. Lefty, but it was a great place to grow up in a great open music scene and somewhat inclusive. Yeah, a lot of young white people bummed out on drugs on the street, but musically, and a lot of white people at the shows at the Fillmore and the Avalon, but it opened up to other artists too, with the jazz artists and people like Bill Graham bringing Miles Davis in, and Aretha Franklin into the Fillmore. Now, I've showed the great photography of Jim Marshall, someone I knew for about 30 years prior to his death, about a dozen years ago. His archive is still being curated wonderfully in a series of books. There's a brand new book that just came out of the Rolling Stones 1972 tour, 50th anniversary of that. But this is a great photo essay of the hate. It overlaps with music and the culture and the street scenes, and it really documents a really important wonderful and tumultuous time in San Francisco, in urban, obviously he photographed the last Beatles concert at Candlestick Park. There's again Ralph J. Gleason with John Lennon. You got the Haight Street Kids of the Haight. Janis Joplin at Winterland. The tour buses, I remember this. I remember the tour buses on Haight Street, and in a way, all these people gawking. Look at the hippies. It was like they were going to a zoo. A great, beautiful portrait of John Cipollina from Quicksilver Messenger Service, one of the most original guitar players of the San Francisco bands. Now, his photographs of Jimi Hendrix. This is at the Monterey Pop Festival, 1967. Jim Marshall also photographed him at on the Panhandle, Golden Gate Park, when he just at the edge of Golden Gate Park, when he played that during his run at the Fillmore. Even artists like the Monkees, when they came to town, when they came to the Bay Area, the Cow Palace, Oakland Coliseum. One of my favorite pictures of Janis Joplin and Grace Slick, the two queens of the San Francisco music scene. Great shots of the British bands that would come to the Fillmore. Bill Graham, pretty much anyone who was in any band of substance played at one of the venues between the Avalon, Chet Helms' Avalon on Sutter Street, or Bill Graham's whole idea of meditations and meditation, Buddhism, spiritualism crossed over. So it was really interesting time. I was a younger person involved and watching this in a way from afar, from a distance. I wasn't into the scene, but it was around me, and I couldn't get away from it. I didn't want to get away from it. This is the Palace of Fine Arts near the marina with Janis Joplin when she got her Porsche. Jim Marshall, The Haight. This book is still available. Now I'm going to show, I have a small stack here of some biographies. I'm not a completist when it comes to having every book on the scene, but here's a book by Blair Jackson, and this is Garcia, An American Life. Great tome of Jerry Garcia. Blair Jackson at the time, he was an editor at a giveaway of California West Coast, started in San Francisco, BAM magazine, Bay Area Music. And this is really I haven't read this in years, but it's a good book. Another one of the Grateful Dead experts, and there's so many books on the Dead, and I don't have, I have a fraction of them. This is Long Strange Trip, An Inside History of the Grateful Dead by Dennis McNally, who worked with the band. This is Been So Long. This is an autobiography of Jorma Kaukonen, obviously one of the original members of Jefferson Airplane, and the cohort with Jack Cassidy of Hot Tuna. Great guitar player. I love Jorma. I've seen him so many times with the Airplane, with Hot Tuna, solo. My Life in Music, autobiographical. This copy is a signed copy, and this has an introduction by Grace Slick, and it has a CD enclosed as well. And then lastly, in terms of the biographies, by Bill Graham, autobiography by Bill Graham and Robert Greenfield. I can't remember if this came out right after he died in that helicopter crash, leaving one of his concerts. Bad weather, typical thing, have to get home, have to get out fast. Was it a Huey Lewis concert? I can't remember, at a Shoreline Amphitheater, and unfortunately he died. Some of the best shows I've seen in my entire life were produced by Bill Graham. Now, Bill Graham was an intense promoter, but he did it right. I know there's stories along the way, the infamous one where he kind of screwed up and was involved peripherally with Live Aid, and that's a debacle he got involved with, but he made it work. His shows were on time. They were great shows, really well done, even into the 70s, the Days on the Green, where I saw Led Zeppelin a couple times, and Fleetwood Mac and those big productions, but the Winterland shows of even the Sex Pistols, but Pink Floyd and Countless shows I've seen there. Sex Pistols, The Last Waltz. Bill Graham was one of the souls of San Francisco, East Coaster. Parents were in concentration camps. Somewhat of a volatile character, but an amazing promoter. Did tours by Bob Dylan, the Rolling Stones as a producer. The scene wouldn't have been the same in San Francisco without Bill Graham. This is a pretty wonderful autobiography. I'm going to close out with two books by Joel Selvin. Joel Selvin was the Chronicles music critic, San Francisco Chronicles music critics, reviewed shows and records, written a bunch of books. And two in particular, Summer of Love. This is really an overview, the inside story of LSD, rock and roll, free love, and high times in the Wild West. Joel Selvin really covers it really well in this book. This is a fantastic overview, and it doesn't paint a pretty picture the entire time. And of course, the other one, which presents the reality of it and a dark picture of a dark event. And this is Altamont, the Rolling Stones, the Hells Angels, and the inside story of rock's darkest days. This is a really well researched book about the whole process and the whole history of how this event started. And after Woodstock, Rolling Stones wanted to do a free tour in Golden Gate Park, and the Grateful Dead tried to have this happen with the Jefferson Airplane and the Rolling Stones, and it kept getting moved into the last minute, and it was going to go to a Napa Speedway, and then it ended up at Altamont, and we know the rest of the story. I attended that as a young 14, 15-year-old, and I don't remember about the murder at the time. If you see the movie Give Me Shelter, the Maisel brothers, a motion picture, you'll see what happened. But this takes it, day by day, point by point. I hate to end this with a darkness, but the scene really went through a lot of changes. And I'm going to just suggest you go over, if you haven't watched already, just to have a little fun, listen to the Quicksilver song, and take a look at my poster collection. There's Grace Slick. This is a poster from the Fillmore Auditorium. The 13th Floor Elevator, The Great Society. This is before she joined the Jefferson Airplane. Sopwith Camel, August 26th, 27th at the Fillmore Auditorium. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Mazzy loves you.